Hi, everyone. This is Brian Thompson, and I am an attorney and the legal compliance manager for Can Do Multiple Sclerosis. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about stay-at-home orders. Chances are you are one of the 297 million Americans that are being forced to stay indoors right now. But every stay-at-home order is a little different, and I still want to talk to you a little bit about what that means. Important to know this is all current as of April 1st, 2020, but things are changing very fast. So make sure you stay up to date about what your local laws and regulations are. Also important to know that every jurisdiction is different. And when I say jurisdiction, I mean state, city, town, county. Everyone's doing something a little bit different. So it's really important to know what's going on and stay up to date as things are changing. And also, I'm going to sort of provide a little bit of legal context, but from a public health perspective, all the experts agree that the only way to flatten the curve and really prevent the spreading of a virus is to stay at home. So even though your laws right now may allow you to go outside, the public health community has all kind of agreed to stay at home as much as possible. So first of all, a little bit of terminology. Some people have stay-at-home orders. Some people have shelter-in-place orders. Are they the same thing? The answer is no, with a but. Traditionally, as the CDC has said, a stay-at-home order is just a way to control movement of big public groups, whereas a shelter-in-place is more restrictive and more confined time-wise. If there's an emergency, you stay indoors until you're told to go out. Those lines have blurred a little bit with COVID-19. For example, San Francisco has a shelter-in-place order, but people are still allowed to go outside to exercise. So that's more of a stay-at-home order in function. Whereas New York has refused to call it a shelter-in-place order because the governor feels that the term shelter-in-place can cause some public panic. So they want to call it a stay-at-home order. So it's a little bit linguistic, but essentially for this discussion, stay-at-home order and shelter-in-place in terms of COVID-19, pretty much the same thing in function. Are stay-at-home orders enforceable? That is a big yes. I think there's a misconception that stay-at-home orders are recommendations, but they have the full force of law. And it's important to know that local authorities, generally speaking, regulate that. So the state passes down a stay-at-home order, but the individual towns and police departments will authorize it. So if you're traveling from one town to another, or if you work in one town and live in another town, the way those police forces regulate the stay-at-home order may be totally different. So definitely do your homework and know what each municipality is doing as far as their stay-at-home order enforcement. Punishments that are out there, mostly it's warnings at this point. A lot of law enforcement wants to make this educational, so they will give you warnings, but being lectured by a police officer is not exactly my idea of fun, and they probably have a lot better things to do, so we want to try to avoid those warnings. It's also important to know that most jurisdictions have upped the ante a little bit. If people are out when they're not supposed to, they can make you take a social distancing course online. There are fines that are being levied, and most stay-at-home orders have a jail time attached to it. I haven't heard of any actual enforcement of jail time yet. I think it would take some really extenuating circumstances and some recidivism, but those are being written into some stay-at-home orders. So just so you know, these are actual laws, and they're not messing around here. So let's figure out what exactly those mean. Can I go outside? Generally speaking, the terminology that they're using is no at all times to the greatest extent possible unless. So that's a mouthful, but pretty much means you should stay indoors as much as you can unless, and there's different terms that are being used, your state may be using critical activities or essential needs, or to perform necessary travel. You should just find out what exactly those activities are just to protect yourself, to make sure you're not going outside when you're not supposed to. So what are some examples of critical activities? There's a lot of them. The big term that I've seen is if you need to do essential business, and those are the necessities of life. So seeing your healthcare professional, getting medical care, any sort of social services, or a lot of government operations still need to operate. IT, if your computer is down and you need to get it fixed, most jurisdictions are saying that is a critical activity at this point. Banks, laundromat, and sort of this broad term called critical retail. So those are your grocery stores, your pet stores, your gas stations, obviously household products, restaurants. I put an asterisk on that because most places are just doing takeout right now. Here in Colorado, the governor specifically named liquor stores and firearm stores as critical activities. So just take a look to see what those essential businesses are to make sure that if you're going out, you're conducting one of those essential activities. And of course, social distancing rules do apply, and in those stay-at-home orders, they do define what social distancing is. So take a look at that and make sure that you're following those regulations. One big question that I've been asked a lot is outdoor recreation a critical activity? So walking, biking. Here in Colorado, we love to cross-country ski or go skinning. And the answer is probably. At this point, most orders are allowing people to go outside to get exercise and fresh air. But not all. So, and those times are changing. It's definitely a fluid situation. So, see what's being allowed and what's not. And again, if you are going out for exercising, almost all of them are applying some sort of social distancing rule. So, what is social distancing? It's a set of rules. We've been hearing a lot about 6 feet. And that's sort of been the rule of thumb. But some jurisdictions are expanding to 8 feet, and maybe that'll continue. Certainly a number in the group. I think here in Colorado it's at 10, but that is fluctuating from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. A lot of the social distancing rules limit locations of where you can go. So a lot of recreation places are being closed, locations that may have vulnerable populations. And then finally, they're including a lot of hygienic activities. So sneezing into your arm instead of your hands, not shaking hands. That's actually being codified into a lot of these social stay-at-home orders. So again, take a look at what's being allowed in your particular jurisdiction at this time and as it's changing. Another big question is, can I visit my family? And this is a big depends on jurisdiction. For example, in San Francisco, they are saying very strongly that no, you cannot visit your family if there is no urgent need. But here in Colorado, there's a little bit more of a laxer language. They're saying you can if you're caring for a family member, but caring is very broadly defined. So even just going in to check on a family member may be considered caring for them. So again, we recommend staying at home, but in some jurisdictions, they're being more lenient on checking in on family, and some are being more restrictive. And of course, as we've all heard in the news, a lot of local restrictions at hospitals, nursing homes, and skilled nursing facilities as we try to protect those vulnerable populations. So let's talk about business owners for a second. Hopefully by now you've thought about a lot of things if you do own your own business or work in HR for a business. But there's sort of 5 questions that a lot of stay-at-home orders are forcing business owners to ask. The first is your business essential? So again, going back to that list of essential businesses, and a lot of things fall into that. If you are essential, the next question that you're going to be asked is, what are your minimum basic operations? So what are the bare bones that you need to operate your business successfully, or at least stay above water? I know here in Colorado, the big goal of the governor is to cut the workforce by at least 50%. So they really want business owners to look at what are your minimum basic operations. Along that line, can employees work remotely? And a lot of stay-at-home orders are saying if they can work remotely, they need to work remotely. So that is something you certainly want to consider. A lot of businesses are now needing to comply to new social distancing and hygiene regulations, and that certainly differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And finally, you should be asking yourself, is there assistance available from the national level with the CARES Act to the very local level, certainly with unemployment benefits. Most jurisdictions are offering assistance to businesses at this time. So that's certainly something you should look into. On the opposite end, what happens if you've been laid off, furloughed, or your hours have been reduced? This is a big issue now where we live here near Vail, Colorado. What most people are recommending is to file for unemployment immediately. There are more benefits being provided to businesses to give unemployment benefits. So there's some special COVID circumstances that can allow you to get assistance earlier. Of course, anytime that you're talking about unemployment benefits, you want to keep as much documentation as you can. Also recommend just taking a look at your current finances. You may be okay now, but it is certainly in your best interest to look at things like loan forbearance. I know my student loans have been suspended for a little while, as well as a lot of bills. So water, electricity, a lot of service providers are giving some leeway in these difficult times. So take a look at what your particular provider is offering. If you're renting, talk to your landlord. Most jurisdictions are putting a ban on evictions at this time, so that's certainly something you'd like to know about. And then just talking to an employment career specialist, figuring out what the next move should be. If there are issues with being laid off or getting unemployment benefits, I would talk to a lawyer if you can. I would be careful. There's a lot of lawyers right now promoting themselves as pandemic lawyers. I don't think there's really such a thing. A lot of lawyers will be able to provide sound advice. So if someone's calling themselves a pandemic lawyer and charging a higher hourly rate, I would look out for that. And then if our dear colleague Roz Calvo here, she would tell you that being laid off or having your employment altered can really have significant impacts on your identity and your emotional and mental health. So just making sure you're checking in with yourself and your loved ones and making sure that inside you're doing okay with this change in your life, along with the very practical financial implications. What about childcare? This is a big issue for a lot of people. Childcare is still open in a lot of places, but some of these stay-at-home orders are putting restrictions on it to just as employees of essential businesses. I'm not sure if that's being regulated, but the spirit of a lot of these new laws is we want the least amount of children congregated together, and we really just want to make sure we're providing critical services to employees that have to work at these essential businesses. If you do drop your child off at a childcare facility, you want to look at some of the new regulations that are out there. They're really tightening what childcare facilities can do as far as group size and if children can go from one group to another. So if you drop your child off and he or she are in a group with 20 people, that may be a red flag that you want to look into. And a lot of these stay-at-home orders are extending regulations to in-house care as well, babysitters and nannies. So take a look at that as well. So what else? We've talked a lot about different aspects of life that stay-at-home orders may change for you. Just a couple other points I'd love to highlight. This is actually an interesting one from a legal nerd standpoint. What if your town is putting one regulation on group size or going outside, but your state, your governor, has issued different regulations? Generally speaking, in this case, your local orders are going to supersede your state orders. So whatever your local municipality has put down is generally going to be what you need to follow, and will supersede the state stay-at-home orders. What about moving? Most of the jurisdictions have specifically said that if you need to move during this time, that is a critical activity, and you can go outside and you can move at this time. But obviously, you want to do a little bit of research before you do that. Similarly, public transportation and taxis and ride shares, a lot of the stay-at-home orders are trying to restrict that and saying just for essential businesses and just for employees of those businesses. So see what your local jurisdiction is doing with public transportation. Mail is kind of an interesting one. That has not been affected for the most part by stay-at-home orders. The U.S. Postal Service has said that they are keeping regular operations, but local post offices ultimately have autonomy and authority. I think I saw last week that over 1,000 post offices have already closed down. So just be careful if you need to mail something really important. Just make sure that receiving post office is still open. Keep track of your car. This is a little tongue-in-cheek, but a lot of us aren't driving as much as we used to, and it's important to remember that there are still street sweepers and garbage trucks and snow plows, and if you need to move your car from one side of the street to another, for example, those regulations are still in effect, and so if you get a ticket or get towed, COVID-19 will not be an excuse. On that note, there's sort of this urban myth going around that police are not pulling people over for speeding because they don't want to get close to you when you roll down your window. I would say that is faulty logic at best. The world keeps turning. If you do have a criminal trial coming up or a civil hearing coming up, check in with your attorney or your court clerk. Most hearings are being suspended at this time or being facilitated virtually, but not all of them. And the last thing you'd want is to not show up for a court date thinking that it was canceled. And the last thing I want to leave you with is just from a broader legal affairs standpoint, is this is a great time to look at your health and life insurance policies, see what's covered before it's an emergency. Certainly with life insurance, this whole situation has shown us that no one is invincible, no one is immune to a virus like this. So take a look at your life insurance policy. Of course, we want to make sure that our loved ones are taken care of if the worst happens. Great time to check in with your financial planner or your state attorney. Obviously, this pandemic is having a widespread impact on the financial markets, so a good time to check in on that. And then just, your power of attorney, your healthcare directives, who would take care and make those decisions if you were incapacitated for some reason, and then just taking a look at our will. It's a good time to make sure we have that in place and planning for the worst case. If you need to get more information, I would highly recommend your jurisdiction website. A lot of times, news sources doesn't quite get the information right. It's like a game of telephone. So those are the websites that are generally that have .gov or .us after it. Those are going to be your best primary sources of what your stay-at-home orders entail and as they change. Advocacy organizations are great for that. The National MS Society has their Navigator program that's really in tune to what's going on locally. So I would certainly take a look at those. And again, if some of these stay-at-home orders are causing some issues, legal aid is a great source to get free legal advice on how some of these executive orders and new regulations may impact you. And a lot of attorneys are doing pro bono work right now, which means they'll help you out with specific issues for free. So stay in the know. Stay at home if you can. If you do need to go out, make sure you're doing it within the confines of your stay-at-home order. And we're going to get through this together. So take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.